Welcome back to another episode of Murderous Minors, Killer Kids. This episode is brought to you by the State of Logic podcast. This is Murderous Minors, Killer Kids, bringing you the frightening and truly insane tales of children with the thirst to kill. Kindergarten through 12th grade murderers. True stories thoroughly researched. Join us weekly for new tales of parents' worst nightmares on Murderous Minors, Killer Kids. Episode number 13. Winner written all over him. Do you remember the first time you walked somewhere alone? Maybe it was to school, maybe to a friend's house to play, but regardless of the destination, it's usually kind of a big deal. Not really for the kid, but mostly for the parents. Most parents are reluctant to allow their children to venture away unsupervised, even for the smallest amounts of time. We all know that irreversible damage can take place within a second spent looking away, or even looking at our phones, attention momentarily diverted. On August 2nd, 1993, young mom Dory Roby allowed her older son, 4-year-old Derrick DJ Roby, to walk the less than 2 blocks that separated the Roby family home from the park located in the tiny village of Savona in upstate New York. It was an overcast morning with rain looming in the clouds, but kids still streamed down their street. As Derrick's baby brother was being tended to by Dory, the spunky 4-year-old convinced her that he would have no problem scooting himself off to the summer recreation program at the park. A fun morning of checkers and kickball lay ahead, a mere 400 yards from his house, at the dead end of their road. Kids walked past the Roby home toward the park all morning, and Derrick was eager to join in, as he had been doing 3 days a week all summer long. Full of energy, he had an attitude that just kept him on a forward trajectory in life, concentrating hard on having fun and cramming the most activities and adventure into a day that he could. Playing t-ball and slamming a home run for his mom, digging up worms, and brushing up on martial arts skills kept him busy. Looking after his baby brother with affection and care kept him happy, as you can clearly see in the numerous video clips available online and linked in the notes. That late summer day in 1993 had begun normally for the Robys and just as normally for the Smith family who lived on the other side of the small farming town. Their son was 13-year-old Eric Smith, a middle child with 2 sisters who lived with his mom Tammy and stepfather Ted Smith. He had just finished up the 6th grade at Campbell Savona Elementary School, and both he and 4-year-old Derrick were attending the recreation program at the park. Ted Smith had begun dating his mother when she was pregnant with Eric and adopted him shortly after birth. As a toddler, he threw tantrums that included him banging his head on the ground. He was a quirky kid, labeled bright but an underachiever. Like other kids around Savona, he watched a lot of TV and had a love for Beavis and Butthead from the MTV cartoon popular in the 90s. Although he repeated the 5th grade, Eric liked to read and enjoyed graphic young adult novels with kids in peril, along with Stephen King books that included violence against animals. It was thought that such interests may have contributed to an event which occurred when he was 9 years old. Eric was caught having killed the neighbor's cat by sliding a clamp over its neck and suffocating it. Ted Smith disciplined his son with physical violence. Initially, the neighbor was angry. However, he softened when, after a few days, Eric apologized and completed some work around the elderly man's home. But the neighbor would later say that the ferocity with which 6-foot Ted Smith grabbed his stepson by the arm and kicked him in his backside made him gasp in fear that he'd broken the small child's back. A friend of Eric's mother also reported having witnessed a similarly frightening episode of discipline. Eric said he often felt bullied by other kids and by members of his own family and had reportedly been in trouble before for putting fruit in the tailpipes of his perceived adult offenders. He did seem to get along better with grown-ups who weren't related to him and even did odd jobs for folks around his neighborhood. Eric had already arrived at the summer program at the park and had been sent home for being disobedient before little Derrick set out on his adventure at 9:15 a.m. The director of the program later stated that Eric continued to ride his bike in an unauthorized area despite being asked more than once to stop. According to Eric's own account, about 3 houses away from the park, he intercepted Derrick, letting him know that there was a shortcut to the day camp and they could arrive first if they took the narrow path through an adjacent lot. Derrick was a smart little boy. He was set to start school later that month and to turn 5 2 months later. He told Eric that he wasn't allowed to go with strangers, but was told, "You'll be okay, I'm right here." Within 10 minutes, 4-year-old Derrick Ro was dead. Once concealed by a nearby patch of sparse trees, Eric strangled Derrick to unconsciousness by putting him in a chokehold. Once he had him on the ground, Eric removed both a paper towel and the plastic from around the sandwich found in Derrick's lunchbox and shoved them down into Derrick's little throat. He then located and unearthed some rocks, one about 25 pounds. He smashed the large rock onto Derrick's head multiple times, then pummeled the 4-year-old's chest and body with smaller ones. He opened Derrick's lunchbox again, squashed the banana inside, and poured his container of red Kool-Aid all over his destroyed little body. The final brutal act of aggression bestowed upon Derrick was sodomy with a 4-inch stick. Eric explained to investigators later his true intent had no sexual overtones. What he really wanted was to stop Derrick's heart. He feared the disciplinary backlash which would lay ahead if Derrick were able to identify his attacker. So he wanted to make sure that he was dead. Around 11:15 a.m., Dory Roby turns up at the park to collect her son earlier than usual due to rain moving in and shutting down all the fun. Dory was met with surprise, which quickly turned to alarm as the staff realized that Derrick hadn't been there at all that day. By early evening, police recovered Derrick's body laying underneath a tree. He was face up on a bed of moss like he was sleeping. He was laid to rest with a bat and a baseball beside him wearing his little T-ball uniform. 4 days later, Tammy Smith and other family members brought Eric to the police station, letting investigators know he may be able to help. He too attended the summer program and was in the area that day. Police remember that he was eager to be questioned, even happy to be there, as they asked what he knew about the events leading up to a battered toddler's body being found in the woods. As it turned out, Eric's grandfather, a retired deputy, encouraged his mother to bring him to the police. He had questioned the boy himself and felt as though he were withholding information. Eric at first said that he didn't see Derrick, but then says he did see him from across the overgrown lot on the other side of the street from where Derrick was walking. He elaborated that he had on a white tank top and that he had a neat lunchbox. They started to press him a bit more fervently regarding the precise location where he was when he saw Derrick. Eric began to shake and get upset. He trembled with fists clenched, then said, "You think I killed him, don't you?" He then asked to take a break. His stepfather brought him a glass of red Kool-Aid and the questioning commenced. They wanted to see if the drink would trigger any reaction, considering that Derrick's container was opened and poured on his wounds. Eric quickly became upset again, throwing the glass onto the floor. It was clear to detectives that this child had seen something extremely traumatizing. However, one glance exchanged between them in the room, and they also knew that Eric had to be much closer to Derrick than he was admitting. They didn't let on, and instead arranged to meet Eric the next day so he could reenact and describe his movements and what he saw that morning. He calmly rode around on his bicycle, clearly enjoying the attention and having all eyes on him, according to investigators. A family friend and mother of Eric's playmate let police know that Eric had changed his clothes on the day of the murder. She said she knew this because he had stayed over at her house the night before the murder. He had been spending the night a lot for months. She dropped him at home in the morning to get his bike and saw him head out. But when she saw him at her house later in different clothes, he said he had been caught up in the rain. She mentioned this to authorities when asked if there was anything about Eric's behavior around that time that they should know about. When investigators asked him to wear the same clothes he had worn to camp that day to a reenactment that they planned for the next morning, he turned up in the second outfit from that day, not the one he left to day camp in. When his mom was questioned and the first set of clothing was located, they were covered in blood. Trying to dig further into Eric's involvement, his friend's mother prepared him a banana split when he spent the night following the reenactment. His reaction was swift and angry. He screamed that he hated fucking bananas. Red Kool-Aid on the floor of the interrogation room, animated disgust at the thought of eating a banana, and the discovery of the bloody clothes really began to increase suspicions, but still provided no real proof. A couple of days after the bicycle reenactment, Eric's family sat him down and demanded he explain exactly what he knew. It didn't take long before he broke down and confessed the length of his involvement. His grandfather, Red Wilson, recalled being present during that confession, describing his heartbreak at hearing his grandson say, I'm sorry, Mom, I killed Derrick." 6 days following the murder on August 8, 1993, Eric was charged with second-degree murder. He was transferred to Monroe County Children's Center and pled not guilty the following month. He underwent rigorous examination and medical testing at the beginning of December. As recommended by the defense-hired expert, psychiatrist Stephen P. Herman, Eric underwent blood testing, neurological examination, as well as testing of his hormone levels. The following year, in August 1994, Eric's trial began for the murder of Derrick Ro. Although Eric had said during police interviews that he didn't know Derrick, a counselor from the summer program testified that he had seen the pair interact on at least 15 different occasions. He stated that they had even played together, including games like checkers and baseball. The prosecution contended that this would help to explain why Derrick would alter his route going into the trees with Eric. Public defender Kevin Bradley never tried to challenge Eric's confession or his guilt. He instead took the route of an insanity defense. He presented the assertion that Eric suffered from some type of mental or emotional impairment at the time of the murders. He referred to Eric's state of mind as extremely emotionally disturbed, causing his eruption of rage that came on unprovoked. Psychological treatment, not prison, is what he contended would be best for Eric. The defense's expert witness, Stephen Herman, attempted to persuade the jury that Eric experienced increasingly low self-esteem as he grew up. He described how Tammy Smith had used an epilepsy medication that may have led to Eric's low IQ, behavioral problems, and physical differences like his small stature and low-set ears. He presented intermittent explosive disorder as a diagnosis, as well as his reason for acting so violently yet unprovoked. Intermittent explosive disorder has 3 major identifying characteristics as explained in court: bedwetting, fire setting, and cruelty to animals. You may also notice that 2 of the 3 identifying characteristics of a serial killer are here as well. Both Herman and Eric's parents agreed he had all 3. Eric's mother and stepfather testified about his anger issues and history of being bullied.
Well, for quite a few years I had a little hot temper myself, so it's hard to say. There's a lot of things I said. Kick their butt up over their shoulders, sick and tired of the crap, sick and tired of you, swat them upside the head.
He'd come home often on the bus
kept
crying.
Picking on him, no matter what he said or did.
And making fun of
picking on him, throw things at him, wouldn't stop,
ears.
call him names.
I just told him that he has to learn to stick up for himself.
Did it work?
No.
And he was really upset, and he was crunching his fists and shaking. I said, "Dad, I need help." He said, "Yes, I do. I want to hurt something like that." And I said, "Hold it." When I got angry, when I was your age, I grabbed the bag in our barn, and I just started beating on it until I was too tired to do anything else. I heard our door shut, and I turned around. He was gone. And as I got to the window, he was coming back in the door. And he was calm. And I looked down, and I noticed his knuckles and his hands were kind of skinned up and bloodied. And I asked him what happened, and he said, "I hit the tree a couple of times. Seemed to be okay." I don't ever recall him saying he was sorry for killing the boy.
Tammy Smith described how she had been taking the anti-seizure medication since the age of 5, and that she also had begun taking an antidepressant in 1979, the year before Eric was born.